the Immortal Brown, Matt Brown, by submission!
Matt Brown is one of the best UFC fighters in the world. However, before he turned professional as a fighter in 2005, Brown was nearly dead. Living in a small town with no foreseeable future outside of a low-paying factory job as a machinist, Brown grew frustrated.
I try to be optimistic, speaking about my childhood, just kind of small town lifestyle and everything. But in reality, it was a pretty negative childhood.
Unfortunately, he turned to drugs and alcohol.
But really, my drug of choice was meth back in that day. That was what I really liked. That was actually what I was addicted to at one point.
One day, his friend injected him with heroin, and he overdosed and was rushed to hospital. He was clinically dead for a minute, though doctors were able to revive him. He said details of what happened remain vague, but he recalls waking up in the hospital and not knowing where he was or why he was there.
I was like, okay, well, I'm never doing heroin again, but let's go do some coke.
After being released from the hospital, Brown was drug-free for a few days. However, he was bored, had little to do that motivated him, and quickly fell back into the trap by taking OxyContin pills.
I knew from a young age that wasn't what I was going to do. I knew I was meant for bigger things.
He'd been fighting in the streets for quite a while, but wasn't familiar with mixed martial arts.
It was a rough time, where I was pretty lost and didn't know what I was motivated for, what I was doing anything for, where I was going to go.
He saw an MMA fight on television though, and became intrigued. Accompanied by a friend, he found himself at a live match. Despite being under the influence, he impulsively volunteered to step into the ring himself.
And they're like, who wants to fight the champion? And I just stood up and I was like, I want to fight this guy tonight, I fought that night and I won.
He went to the gym to train with some MMA fighters, fully expecting he'd hand out some serious butt whippings. Instead, he took many beatings.
I like testing myself, I like pushing myself, I like being nervous, I like being scared.
Brown realized that this was something he wasn't good at, and suddenly he had a goal to work toward.
I need to get to a gym, and actually see if I can do this. And that's when I moved to Columbus, and because I wanted to get away from the drugs and alcohol and stuff too. I was still partying like crazy back then.
He began to wean himself off drugs, though he admits it was a slow progression. He made it to the UFC within 2 years of turning pro.
And by the time I decided to turn pro, I was living completely clean and completely dedicated and committed 1,000% to the martial arts.
He's now known as the Immortal, with a pro MMA record of 24-19-0. A guy who was seconds away from tragedy, who was on the verge of becoming just another statistic, became one of the most exciting fighters in the world. As of May 2024, Brown has announced his retirement from the UFC after nearly 19 years in the sport. He says his life will now be dedicated to serving others, growing others in the martial arts, and building businesses that can help the community and the world.